Hello world of YouTube and welcome to List Week 2025, where I'm going to be looking at the best and worst of what I experienced in the worlds of music and gaming from 2025. Starting with the best games, or my picks for the best games that I played out of the ones that came out in 2025. I did not play everything. I talked about it a little bit in the script. I did still play enough to make a list like this, but I didn't play enough to make a worst games list. I'll talk about the worst game I played in a minute. But as far as gaming in 2025 goes, I feel like it was a pretty solid year. It was also a year where a lot of things came out for various niche audiences, some of which I had interest in but didn't play, that I'll talk about in other parts of the video. But some of which I also didn't play because of platform, but I did watch people play, like Peak, shout out to Shake and his solo climb run, or Water Park Simulator. Shout out to Kalen. I watched him stream that too, and it was pretty cool. This year had some vibey games that I just couldn't play because I don't have a PC. That being said, there were some other games that I played that I didn't really like. But if I were to talk about the worst of the bunch, even if I'm not doing a worst list, probably would be Little Nightmares 3. No knock to Supermassive. Wild team to have develop Little Nightmares 3, but also the game wasn't necessarily like poorly designed. It was just kind of boring, which from a series that like I'm also not like, I like both other Little Nightmares games, but I'm not like, they're not games that I would rank amongst like the best of the best. They're just solid little gems, but this third one very much not so. With any sort of preamble out of the way, let's go ahead and dive on into the list. Give it a like if you're excited, and let's get the gravy train rolling.
Among a handful of games I started this year but never ended up finishing, I started Supergiant's Bastion because I really enjoyed Hades and was excited for Hades 2 to come out of alpha this year. The irony of that is that not only did I not finish Bastion, but I didn't play Hades 2. I'd had a lot of friends and coworkers tell me it was great. It just came out at a time when my plate already had a lot on it and I couldn't get to it. I did play a few games that were inspired a bit by Hades this year, though. However, unlike Wizard of Legend 2, I don't think the Rogue Prince of Persia is like it to a point that it feels derivative. That said, one huge component that feels like it outside of how the gameplay loop sort of unfolds is that it is a game where you evolve your hub similarly to that. It doesn't necessarily have something new at the end of every run like Hades does, especially early on, but the more that you unlock, the more that it kind of unfolds very similarly. But I do think, outside of the combat and stuff that kind of falls in the similar realm, which I'll get to in a bit, I think the time travel aspect of the story makes this game progress feel more like Deathloop, considering how you're aiming to take revenge against the Huns by rewriting the past, while recombing through your home in search of your family. Something that I think is a neat spin, and again, works well within the genre at hand. It's just a fun use of time travel. The gameplay itself in Rogue Pop is also a fun twist on this franchise's foundation from a platforming point. I like the little gauntlets sprinkled throughout the maps and how fluid it all feels while in the pocket. Following a smash like last year's The Lost Crown, I'm glad that Evil Empire could deliver on a game that blends the same focus on map exploration seen in the roots of the series and a big focus on the last one, but give the combat a different way to evolve that lends to the roguelite design approach. It's also the other component that feels a bit Hades adjacent, considering how your build can evolve, the weapons and how they handle especially. And it's another aspect that I do like. I honestly rarely found myself preferring the blade weapons like your swords more so to your axes or even your maces. I think the branching paths and limits of exploration are kind of Hades adjacent, but with how sort of glitchy I found it can be, it's also led to some of the goofiest moments I've encountered in gaming this year, which was a treat every time. A game I kept coming back to and liking more and more each time I did. Sorry to Hades fans that I didn't play Hades 2, I'll rectify that sometime soon. Ironically enough, even if I went almost all in on ninjas this year, I didn't play the highly anticipated fourth game from the Ninja Gaiden franchise that released back in October. I'd thought about it, but mostly because I'd played through the Game Kitchen's Ninja Gaiden Ragebound and thought it was fun. Not that I hate the Team Ninja 3D Ninja Gaiden games, but I've only played maybe a slice of the first, at least that I can remember. And I do love the second, even if it's the only other game in the 3D ones I've played. Even if it is impossible. I also do like the first NES Ninja Gaiden game. It's still the only one I've played in that era, but it is also impossible. Ragebound is a game that I think has some components that sort of feel in the spirit of the classic games, even if they are a bit modernized, and they also feel very much like they are a game published by Dotemu, namely in the spirit of the level-to-level challenges. Again, I think that those components work better within the confines of this game and where the challenge really lies. It's that litmus test that I think is interesting to give to the player instead of giving them just this onslaught of difficulty. The game does incentivize you to play the game again after beating it on the hard mode, but it's not necessarily something you have to do, even if it is again where the challenge lies in tandem with the level challenges. The story itself is solid as well. It's a sort of sidequel, but not in the way that I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be a tie-in to the game that I knew was coming out. However, it is a tie to the original NES Ninja Gaiden, where Ryu shows up in the beginning before going to America, leaving you, his protege, Kenji Mozu, to defend the Dragon Clan, which then gets overrun with the Black Spider Clan, and a whole conflict happens with demons, and there's this other person that gets introduced in Kumori, who I think has a really nice slice of the story, shows a good use of the power that sort of is the core of the story in a different way. And I like that it also keeps Ryu's adventure sort of in the horizons with the US government also, of course, getting involved in something like this. It's not the deepest world, but it's engaging enough through to its end. I also like how the game sort of shifts design spirit when you get Kumori. They do a good job at developing these tangents to sort of excite the gameplay loop that I really enjoyed. There's other detours that the team made as well that I think feel very in vogue, especially in a post-Cyber Shadow world. I don't think this game is as good as Cyber Shadow. I don't even think it's as good as a different Ninja game that I'm about to talk about. But I think that, Team Kitchen and their style really stuck the landing here. And I think that while it does sort of have the style of a Dotemu published game with its pixel style, I think that the Game Kitchen's version of pixel art and their stuff that they've shown in games like Blasphemous still shines in ways on here that I think are really choice. This game rocks, and I think that Ninja fans ate a lot this year between this and a game that I'm about to talk about. But again, don't sleep on this game. It's pretty solid. Similarly to the Boat Dude the Game duology of 2023, we had a bit of a Coke-Pepsi dilemma in a few worlds in 2025, one of which came about amidst Ninja Fever, where we had two similar action platformers in older Ninja franchises release. And unlike the Boat Dude the Game Pepsi-Coke dilemma of 2023, I played both Ninja platformers. And while I liked the gameplay and style of Ninja Gaiden Ragebound, I think it's edged out by Shinobi Art of Vengeance, if only by a little bit. I've got my skepticism about some parts of this Sega relaunch, but even upon first glance, I thought this game looked sick. Similarly to Ninja Gaiden, I have experience with the 2D and 3D eras of this franchise. Even if I like the style of the 2000s 3D PS2 classic more than the 16-bit offerings, I thought Lizard Cube modernized Streets of Rage well in Streets of Rage 4, and their style definitely fits the classic Genesis era Shinobi mold strongly. The action is accented with flashy visuals, and the level design pops just as vibrantly. I think the combat between it and Ragebound is comparable, but Joe Musashi's build just rounds out differently throughout his pilgrimage of revenge against the Annie Corporation. It lends to a combat approach that blends more with the movement that I think creates a really fun back and forth, especially in boss battles. I also like where the focus on challenge differs between this and Ragebound. The thought of having things like the Elite Squads, shop unlockable tokens, and hidden rifts in the former versus the level-to-level challenges, beetles, and skulls in the latter creates a different focus on level design that I appreciated more in Shinobi, but still valued in both. Shinobi also has more detours than Ninja Gaiden, which lends to a bit more of a dynamic but still decently paced adventure. There's a fluidity in combat and traversal here that I think is present in Ragebound, but thanks to Lizard Cube's art style, it just has better game feel. I also enjoy the cast of characters here a bit more. While I'm not one to replay games, hell, like I said in the Games of the Decade So Far video, even though I adored Cyber Shadow, I only started replaying it to see if I enjoyed it a few years later. I have more interest in replaying levels from Shinobi to find everything more than I am perfecting the levels in Ninja Gaiden, though, and that's also what sort of edges it out above the other in this sort of list. As far as relaunches go, I do hope this inspires Sega to give more love to this series, because I'd love to play another 3D hack and slash Shinobi game. Hell, re-release the old ones in the meantime. Please. The other Coke Pepsi dilemma I mentioned in the last part was also another entry in the long-standing war of Mario versus Sonic. Mascots of opposing companies turned into Olympic competitors for a while. Had a bit of a rivalry this year, but this time it was in the streets. Sonic Racing Crossworlds was my first slice of the kart racing series from the Blue Blur, but I think this was a pretty great time. I wasn't sure what to expect, and considering this franchise started it as worship to Sega as a company, I'm glad that still feels like some of the spirit of this, considering what they're adding to the game, even if it feels more indebted to Sonic's legacy at the moment. I do think they could have gone a little deeper into the classic era, especially considering they're doing a relaunch of franchises that span from their mid to early points in their life. But the fact that we're getting more Sonic Riders and Sonic 06 references in 2025 is wild. I also like singing Blaze from Sonic Rush. The idea of non-Sonic characters in a game like this is smart too. The places they're pulling from, though, are wild as hell. Not bad, just wild. Even if SpongeBob does have a lot of games under his belt as a character, I wouldn't rank the sole kart game I've played with him amongst the best. Hell, I think it might be hot garbage. It's also just a wild addition before something like Pac-Man, who is coming down the pipeline. The addition of characters like Steve and Alex from Minecraft and Joker from Persona also do make sense in a modern gaming respect sort of way, but they're still wild early pulls. The idea of crossing worlds mid-race also adds an element of chaos to an already chaotic game that I think creates a gameplay loop that is mad, but fun to get steeped in. It keeps Grand Prix a bit more fresh and adds an element of surprise that I kept enjoying every time. It's something that lends to the creative process I'd never really considered in a game like this, but in that same breath, feel as if Sega aren't realizing the full potential of something like this. Hear me out.
Sonic's 35th is coming up, right? He has a smattering of potential for level ideas for the Crossworld sections in particular to celebrate that 35th anniversary. Think about it. Mushroom Hill, Flying Battery, Sky Sanctuary, Angel Island itself, Death Egg. Hell, you can even have, like, even Green Hill Zone, the iconic stuff, Chemical Plant and the like. Just be made into levels in this game. I think it'd be a really good idea that doesn't necessarily have to make it a 3-lap endeavor like some of the other ones with a special 3rd lap. Just having a cutaway level that you can sprinkle in through the Crossworlds feels like something that should have been done with this to begin with, considering how maybe not as deep in concept some of those older levels are, but just feels like a lost opportunity, considering this game feels like it's trying to build towards celebrating Sega, and Sonic's 35th is again right around the corner. Feels like the perfect time for it, you know?
That being said, there are a few other issues that I think set the game back a bit. The gameplay itself can get a little much in some of the non-Grand Prix game modes, but that could be a bit more of a litmus test of me getting old over anything else. Racing in this is still really fun, and there are bells and whistles that separate it from what I'd say I'm used to with this genre in most general circumstances. I like the idea of bringing boats and planes into the mix, especially for someone who loves Diddy Kong Racing as much as I do, but I do not like the boat in this game, and there are so many levels that use the boat. The plane I kind of dig, and it, took some getting used to, but once I got the hang of it, it really felt nice. The game also does have lobbies that gets tense, but between that and the Grand Prix circuits, there's not a lot to chew through. I just wish there were some avenues to do other different things. The other, bonus races and, the single race laps are fun, but again, there's not as much variety as I would have hoped, considering this was a franchise that's been around for at least a little while, Still a solid, fun time, though, and I feel like if you weren't getting the Nintendo Switch 2 and were slim on the kart racing front, you could have done worse with Sonic Racing Crossworlds. It's a pretty fun time. Between the remakes of the first and second game in the Katamari series, I'd been waiting for the real ball to drop and Bandai Namco to finally drop the first game in this strange but hilarious series that has some personal favorites of mine within it in ages. Once Upon a Katamari, while very similar to We Love Katamari, is something I'm very much not that mad at. The gameplay loop is still so very fun. I like that the game really takes its time, giving the player a bit of variety in the reasons to roll things up that makes the framework feel more interesting. I like that it also circumvents you back often to incentivize you to explore these levels more, something that yields more challenges and fun cosmetics in true Katamari fashion. While there are some elements I don't like as much as the first two games, namely its soundtrack, it doesn't set the game tremendously back. The music is still good, it just doesn't hit as hard. The multiplayer aspect is a mode that I think is also pretty neat, but I don't know how often I'd play it. I do like the idea of time traveling, but I think in a game like Katamari, there are a few tangents where it goes a bit more abstract and like accurate, when I think the farce as it plays on the time periods is sort of something I really enjoyed about the game, especially considering there are cutscenes where you see the king and queen of the cosmos in each era, and it's a great reinforcement of the series humor while also sort of, again, playing a farce to the eras. It's a game that knows it's lighthearted at its core and lets that shine through and through. It's a game I've been eyeing to complete as well, which is also something I don't necessarily do that often anymore, but that's also because it's just so fun to roll up at Katamari. I'm a sucker for it, and I appreciated it in a year where finances dictated what I played. It was nice that this was a bit less pricey, just like any good Katamari Damacy game. It's a foundation that still works well, and while there are also some minor tweaks in the controls that streamline it in ways that I enjoy. If you've never played in the game in the series, there are better, but even if you end up scooping this for recency's sake, I don't think you'd walk away hating your time. I don't know who Ren Game are, but they brought this series back with a pretty solid relaunch that I hope, again, Namco decides to do a little more with. There's some potential here that they could keep making some games in this series that I think could be pretty solid. How many times are Nintendo going to sell me this? I'm not asking this with anger directed to Donkey Kong Bonanza, more so just in mild shock. Shout out to Crash Thompson, by the way, for lending me his Nintendo Switch fairly recently. The biggest justifier for the January release I maybe have ever had in the time of making vids like this. I ended up rounding out my list with this and something else I'll get to later. Banzana's another fun sandbox, though, with a character that might be the most fitting. The game being built around destruction highlights the depth of your exploration options, and is a decent showcasing of the Switch 2's improvements as a console. The open map, minigame collectible approach also feels more apropos for Donkey Kong because of his last 3D adventure 26 years ago. There are a few moments that very much took me back to the minigame sprinkled throughout that adventure. The design of the fractones and the animal transformations DK gets also give me flashes of that last team to make a 3D DK adventure. It's an interesting sort of reinterpretation of nostalgia that modernizes it, considering how the collectible aspect is done in this. It's where the blending of those animal transformations and their abilities with the open sandbox environment, that true harmony of past and present comes together. That also kind of happens with the narrative of this game. It all feels new and fresh and kind of strange, but then it gets more and more nostalgic the deeper that you dive. And there's a harmony across the worlds that feels more unified the deeper that you dive. There's a magic within this game that I think is pretty choice. It's obviously not the best game I played this year, but I feel like if you want to switch to, outside of maybe another game that I didn't play that came out this year, this would be a pretty strong contender for why you should buy one, because it's pretty fun. While Mario Kart World is certainly the other piece of the Coke Pepsi mascot kart racer dilemma I mentioned in the Sonic Racing portion, what I think is more interesting is that Nintendo also decided to have their own Dr. Pepper enter the proverbial race in Kirby Air Riders. A game I wanted to play admittedly a little more than Mario Kart World, but if I wasn't buying Metroid Prime 4 while having access to Crash's Switch, I also wasn't going to buy Kirby Air Riders, even if the amiibos are sick as fuck. Mario Kart World was a bit of a surprise, though. Between it and Sonic Racing Cross Worlds, I think Mario wins, if only by a small margin once again. The more support Sonic gets could eclipse it for variety alone, though. The biggest edge it has over Sonic is time. This feels like the refining of a formula molded for 33 years. Between the bringing back of the feather, bigger wallet, and focus on coins, there's a feeling of homage to this that very much melds together with the new ideas wonderfully. I think the focus on going around the world map between circuits and Grand Prix is a fun prospect. The unlocking of characters and costumes with items is a neat surprise. The roster is pretty choice, and the tracks themselves are mostly pretty great. As a console launch title, we should have suspected Donkey Kong was getting some love early on in the console's life. There's so much love to him in here that's a delight to see. More so than the recent entries, anyhow. The music choice also has some niche cuts. They made me not hate Choco Mountain. It's the kind of refresh I wasn't fully expecting here, considering how recently the Mario Kart 8 DLC was. But I'm glad the series I've loved for so long is still pretty great. I think the boat here is better than the boat in Sonic, but I will admit the plane in Sonic is better. I also don't hate the way the karts control here, but I am fighting that same refined intuition where I'm not doing so in Sonic Racing Cross Worlds. It's not a huge hindrance, it's just an observation I've made with the time I've spent with it. I've heard Sonic has more lobbies than Mario Kart, but again, it's getting much more support than this. But that's a disservice to a great time. The open world single player is also a pretty solid detour that had some decent challenges sprinkled on the map. I only wish there felt like a reason to play it. As far as launch eras for a console go, I do think this as the launch game makes a lot of sense, but the ensuing months only really have 2 other exclusives. While being a nice switch up from the norm, they still feel like something is missing a little bit. I hope Nintendo does support this game somehow. I do think the design of this game lends itself less to something like DLC, but I don't think it's an impossible prospect. Maybe dropping a companion island could work, Burnout Paradise style, filled with a blending of new courses and other throwbacks reinvented. Either way, there's some pretty good stuff here, and it's nice to see something as old as me still showing it's got legs. Along with ninjas, I played a lot of skateboarding games in 2025. More so, actually. Both the Tony Hawk 3 and 4 remake and the Skate Early Access thing were fun excursions in their own regard, even if they didn't make the list. And that Sword by the Sea game was a neat board sport-inspired title that I just wanted a bit more from on the other side. However, the December release by Sam Eng's Skate Story stands above them all in absurd, surreal splendor. A game that presents an odd concept in an art-forward postmodern place, backed by a sick soundtrack that I talked about in the listening log last week. You learn the language of this game that uses a skateboard to not only transport the player along the celestial highway on your quest to eat some moons, but also to embody keeping your identity in a world so obtuse. It is the familiarity amidst the quests of giving inspiration to pigeons, avoiding amorphous demons in an underground, upholding your own personal hell of not letting you shred, and the various showdowns you encounter. The game is equal parts vibes and confusion, or all vibes, if you accept the absurdity on display as it continues to unravel. It's a very visually striking game. The embracing of city spots in these various hellscapes add to the layers of abstract that aim to add familiarity to a world so foreign. The subway design in particular is one that I really liked. There's a moment in the very end with all of your companions on a subway that I enjoyed. The fact every level ends with a sort of story retelling what you did is another creative choice that helps ground the player in the weirdness that I loved. It's a very unique game that I think honestly is pretty easy to approach from a control standpoint, even if there is a bit of a learning curve initially. If you understand skateboarding as a sport, it's something one could pick up with time. Sure, you're fragile since you're made of glass, so you'll probably die a lot while learning, but it makes the accomplishments you end up making along the road hit even harder. The artistic distance it goes in its end created this experience I loved a lot, and rounds out the experience of setting it in a world I very much enjoy. Another short indie extreme sports game, and a decade stacked with them that I could see myself redigging into someday to master its deeper challenges. I know I'll at least enjoy the vibes when I decide to.
And the game of the year is mon ami Clair Obscur, Expedition 33!
I've not seen a recoil and opinion for a game this quickly since, well, actually a few months before this, but I'll get to that. While I agree more games should have gotten a platform during the Game Awards, that's a wholly different conversation about using a show to support the medium as a whole. That could be its own video, considering the chaotic state of the gaming industry, along with other creative fields as of late. Something I don't plan on spending a lot of this video diving into. That said, Clair Obscur Expedition 33 might not be my personal game of the year either, but I still think it should be looked at as one of the year's biggest highlights as far as quality releases from the year go. As far as the story goes, it has some of my favorite dramatic beats and moments I'd experienced in the medium this year. The combat was still choice, the soundtrack was still aces, spoilers, but it's on my broader top 50 albums of the year along with the Skate Story soundtrack. The abstract set pieces were an interesting idea that I think, considering where the story goes, lends to its artistic direction well, and the strengths within this cast from a character perspective I very much love. I share the apprehensions of the community when the AI controversy arose after the Game Awards, and think it does deserve to be stripped of awards if the dev team lied about the development process when submitting for eligibility. I'm glad that whatever AI asset was in the game was removed, but I think it illustrates the slippery slope when it comes to AI as a tool in the arts, a subject I've touched on in other videos, but will say as the field of AI continues to grow and improve from a usability standpoint, the importance of disclosure for those that have apprehensions on AI is equally as important. The use of it as a springboard does seem a bit more obvious in hindsight, considering the way some of the visuals really look. I think it adds to the uncanny abstractness of the world. I also think there is a difference between the generative slop that people want to compare Expedition 33 to in the wake of the controversy than it, but view that slop as the bottom of the previously mentioned slope that I do not want to see normalized in the arts. It is the capitalist version of this field that's already been at war with the cost of production that you already see plaguing other fields just as bountifully. It adds the sort of work to the consumer that I could see being viewed as not worth it enough and becoming accepted in the arts that I don't want to see. But I don't think Expedition 33 will be the catalyst that welcomes that in. If anything, its story is what makes it human. It's a very depressing game at its core that touches on the complexity of grief well, and I think it's sad that some of that is being lost in this conversation. Also, I turned 33 this year, which is a wild thing to think about while playing it. This game really is choice. As somebody who's been really getting back into RPGs in his 30s, this is one that I'm really glad I spent time with, and think you should too. My long-standing love of a solo, personality-filled indie game has really been showing the last few years. If bringing it back for a new season this year is any indication, so has my love of the roguelike genre. Tonda Ross's Blueprints was a game I showed off this season that lives in both of those cities, and my addiction was far from over by the time I finished making that episode. It took me longer than it should have, mostly because I was overlooking the key to the final puzzle day after day due to hating the room having to draft it is in, but I had no issue sticking through it to the end. The road of mystery, mind puzzles, and evolving strategy created such a great gameplay loop. The minimal soundtrack and reserved cutscenes not only enhanced the atmosphere and immersion of the game as I crafted this house day after day trying to find the secret 46th room, but it's something I relished in every time one of those oddities would crop up. They also act as pieces to the puzzle to guide you through the random chaos, to help lay roots in important places, to build to the right direction to reach the goal. That being said, similarly to Animal Well, what I didn't expect on the other side of Room 46's door was a deep void of post-game. One that beckons you to follow the crown, to see just how deep the rabbit hole goes. What unfolds throughout various puzzles involving time, math, special objects, dates, specific room pulls, and in some runs, learning a different language, is a game that if you decide to answer the call, can be a pretty mind-blowing gameplay experience. You truly have to live on Mount Holly, so to speak, if deciding to complete the game becomes in your view, but considering I spent almost 180 hours in the game, I very much loved my stay here. It's a game that absolutely did and still does capture my intrigue and fascinate me. Hell, I'm still doing one of those runs of this on the Saturday special, trying to beat the game in its special dare mode. I spent a whole day trying to break the game by moving rooms that shouldn't be moved. I've spent in-game weeks trying to build a type of room across a certain row in a grid to look for secrets. I've played a little bit of the impossible curse mode. The deeper lore within the game is just as intoxicating to find more about as you learn about your mother's true life amidst writing children's novels. You learn about your family as a whole, the history of the land you're on, and so many secrets. Tonda Ross made a world here, and it's very much worth your time if you love puzzles and mystery. Something I adore, and unlike my hesitation to dive deeper into Animal Well last year, I fell hard for Blueprints. It left a pretty deep impact in my mind, especially as each layer of the game continued to be unfolded. While not my game of the year, because I do think that some of the reliance on figuring out what the game is really trying to randomly guide you towards is a bit of a frustration, it is easily the game I spent the most time with in 2025. What are we doing here? Sure, I didn't play Deltarune, Death Stranding 2, or any of the other aforementioned long-awaited games from earlier in the video, but how in the nine hells has Hollow Knight seemingly lost fans in the wake of Silksong's release? Similarly to my opinion on Danny Brown's Starlight, I'm left on the other side with a question. Did you really expect anything different? Hollow Knight is a game that is stacked with great NPCs, dripping with personality-driven style, and is hard. It is a game that demands your patience. Silksong is its sequel that checks all of those boxes and then some. I love this game on the other side so much. It has its own share of memorable characters, great set pieces, wonderful bosses, and a challenge that feels like the kind of ramp up I expect from a sequel. The biggest hindrance I've seen about this game is its difficulty, and I get that. Some bosses and runbacks are hard. I guess it's just, that's what I signed up for. Like, is BioWater bullshit? Yeah. Did I hate the enemy gauntlet in the Act 2 quest for the songs? Absolutely. In that same breath, A lot of the boss fights are sick as fuck. The Pin Master fight that is completely optional is emotional as hell. The Trobio fights are insanely awesome. The drama I love about the first game is all there in many of the battles that I think are great at engrossing the player, thanks to the set pieces, but also to the wonderful soundtrack that is also on my top 50 albums of the year list. I know to some degree this game had its own version of what Elden Ring did for FromSoft Souls-likes because of its sudden release, but also already immense hype. That could be a contributor to the wave of backlash, but I feel like it's soured on some people who loved the first one, which is much more an interesting talking point to me. Was it a case of solely the game being built around a way that reflects the world's cruelness in select moments, or was navigating a world while fighting one's own long-standing muscle memory for a game that this isn't also a relatable part to the disconnect? Possibly a bit of both. Regardless, it was a cocktail that was very much successful for Team Cherry, and I'm glad it was. It's a game that I think in some ways feels deeper than Hollow Knight 2, considering Hornet has such a personality, and I also very much love that. I love some of the relationships she builds throughout her adventure, and some of the dramatic payoffs some of those end up on. The late game reveals and stuff in general are pretty dope. Farloom is a world ripe with lore just like Hallownest, and Hornet's plunge into that sees her looking at herself in ways I liked from the character POV too. Wonderful time. Can't recommend enough if you like this sort of gameplay style and want a game that'll give you a great ride through it all. Easily my game of the year because of how it feels truly like a sequel to a game I adore, in the spirit of where it grows from a game that already had so much done right. Both it and Blueprints are games that feel nurtured. The time put into them very much shows. While it shows in the deep chaos of Blueprints that still presents a wealth of ideas and different narrative swerves, it sticks out harder in the depth of Silk Song. The world has so many details, both far and close, and the abundance of NPCs I enjoyed talking to help flesh out this world in a way that feels very much in the spirit of Hollow Knight, but more. It led to a world that I loved the grind through, and I feel like if you have the patience for it, you will love the grind too.
Thank you so much for watching. That was my list. What was your favorite game you played from 2025? Sound off in the comments down below. What was your least favorite? Do you agree with some of my picks? Do you disagree?
Are you excited for List Weekend? Because List Week is now being dropped between really today and tomorrow. We'll have the best singles, and then tomorrow we'll have the best and worst albums, which hopefully you're also excited for. And I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just drop the rest of the videos and then leave this one for the end if it was really the problem? Because it was. I didn't have none of the other videos are done, so I've got to finish those so I can give them to you guys. But this was the most involved. I usually start with this one for that reason, and my computer was really showing its age in the veins of gathering the clips together and all that. It's just a more involved process that I'm sure comes across the page. But hopefully, again, you enjoyed it. I'm gonna go, though. You guys have good days, lots of situations. And I'll see you later today if you watch the singles video.